Thanks, folks, for joining. We will get started in just a minute. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Trustees Conservation in Action webinar series. My name is Amy Nation. I'm the project manager for the Boston Waterfront Initiative here at the Trustees. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you're excited to get an in-depth look at an initiative to create a completely new, unique property. Each one of our 122 special places has its own unique history and treasures to offer. Our team of stewards, curators, ecologists, and many others play a role in bringing these environments to life. Today, you'll hear about the exciting work we're doing on Boston's urban waterfront. These efforts would not be possible without the support of our donors, and we cannot thank them enough. When the world went virtual more than 2 years ago, we launched new online programming like this webinar series in order to stay connected to our members, visitors, and supporters. We've since found that our online webinars help us to reach a broader audience, including those who have gained a renewed appreciation for nature and getting outside. I hope these webinars will inspire you to get out and explore a trustee's property and help you to learn about our many new initiatives and projects. We believe this work will help us to get the next generation outside and build the trustees of the future. Thanks again for supporting our mission to protect and share the places people love. Please submit questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. The presenters will pause for questions after their presentation. Also, next to the Q&A button, you will see a live transcript option. If you would like to enable closed captions to appear at the bottom of your screen, please select Live Transcript and Show Subtitle. Now I'll hand it over to Vidya Tikku and Nick Black.
Thanks, Amy. Hi, everyone. My name is Vidya Tikku. I'm the Vice President for the Urban Outdoors with the Trustees. Nick, do you want to switch to the next slide? Before my colleagues here share the details of the Pierce Park 3 project with you today, I wanted to take a couple of minutes just to share the context in which this project sits within the Trustees and our work with the communities. So as many of you may know, the Trustees started out in 1891 in Boston, and our founder, Charles Elliott, listed one of the very fundamental goals for the organization to be the securement and access to open space for all of the residents of dense urban cities, starting out with Boston. So not a new concept for us. This is where we started, and fast forward to today, we're looking at a 2050 scenario where 70% of the global population will call urban areas their home. We already have 2/3 of Massachusetts living in just 2 cities, which is Boston and Springfield right now. So what does this mean for the Trustees? Our passion is to connect people to their special places and their outdoors. And to follow this mission forward, it becomes imperative for us that we focus our work here on our urban centers. Next slide. So we're looking at the initiative that you see on your screen, Urban Outdoors, which is to reconnect our mission with all communities that live in the urban cities across the Commonwealth. We are starting out this initiative looking through 3 lenses that you see on the screen: access to fresh food for all for healthy living, and increased access to recreation opportunities, and also building a resilient network and infrastructure of open spaces for all our urban coastlines, urban forests, and gardens. The Trustees is the largest owner of the coastline in Massachusetts, and it is in that context of bringing our mission and expertise in coastal management that brought us to launch the Boston Waterfront Initiative. with Pierce Park 3 as our first project within that initiative. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nick and he can share more details on the project itself.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vidya. Afternoon, everyone. My name is Nick Black. I am the Managing Director of the Boston Waterfront Initiative here at the Trustees of Reservations. As a refresher for anyone who is joining us for the first time, I did just want to begin by restating the trustees' vision for the Boston Waterfront. And you heard Vidya talk about it a bit there in her introduction about the urban outdoors landscape. But the Pierce Park 3 project is part of an overall vision that imagines a network of connected green open space that's publicly accessible around Boston's waterfront. We've spent several years identifying places where we can create such a series of parks that meet the following criteria that you see here. A world-class destination in its design and programming that supports the community's needs and is accessible to all, that brings value to Boston's climate resiliency goals, and is something that we can build and maintain through philanthropic support. In 2020, the trustees were designated by Massport as a nonprofit partner to design, construct, and manage Pierce Park 3, which you see here, adjacent to the current Pierce Park, as well as the future Pierce Park 2 site, which is now under construction. Since our designation in 2020, we have increased community outreach and engagement to gather feedback on the Pierce Park 3 design and the future programming opportunities at the park itself. This past year, we've have spent much of our time focused on connecting with the community in East Boston and all across the city. Our goal has always been to enhance the design and programming of Pierce Park by offering fun, free activities that attract diverse audiences and provide a platform for new experiences. Much of our engagement and programming was supported this summer by our 4th cohort of Waterfront ambassadors. This included 10 local teams from East Boston, Chelsea, Roslindale, and South Boston, who were employed in the 7-week Waterfront Ambassadors program, where they conducted community outreach about Pierce Park 3, helped with programs like Family Festival, taught a morning lesson at the Pierce Park Sailing Center, and helped out at the Eastie Farm, and much, much more. The Waterfront Ambassadors helped us with community outreach throughout the duration of the program, including a weekly farmers market in East Boston, as pictured here. They helped community members fill out community surveys and mock up designs for Pierce Park 3, share their feedback, and talk about the waterfront. Our ambassadors also held their own youth walking tour, where they engaged with young people in the community to learn about the Pierce Park 3 project. With outreach and programming combined, our team has engaged over 4,500 people in 2022 alone around the Pierce Park 3 project. We held monthly Sabores de Nuestra cultural family festivals in collaboration with the Pierce Park Sailing Center and the Veronica Robles Cultural Center once again this past summer. During the festivals, community members were able to enjoy free sailing, dance performances, participate in yoga and Reiki with the East Boston Neighborhood Health Center, and delicious food from local vendors like La Casa de Pan de Bono, Chapasico, and Popsicles. Hundreds of people got out onto the water during these free programs, and we heard and saw that access to the water during these events was a major highlight for folks. This year, we were also able to table at various community events like the Boston Harbor Now Free Ferry Day, the Eastie Pride Day, and to share about the Pierce Park 3 project, our surveys and programming happening throughout the year. We also participated in a peace circle centered around the Pierce Park 3 project with Maverick Landing Community Services, where members shared their memories at Pierce Park and ideas for design and programming. We engaged with nearly 2,500 folks at partner events just this past summer alone. Our team also hosted a Waterfront on Wheels tour in partnership with the Friends of the Mary Ellen Welch Greenway, a series of educational site tours that started at the Mary Ellen Welch Greenway, passed through Pierce Park, and all the way to Constitution Beach. Special shout out to Councilor Gabriela Coletta, who joined our July tour during Eastie Week and helped share about the history of the Greenway. We also launched a co-organized site for a simplified and multilingual online engagement and information sharing and feedback gathering. The comment wall has received lots of feedback and generated some discussion amongst residents and visitors. This site is mobile and text compatible with interactive feedback features, and a project timeline. So please check it out now if you haven't had the chance. And of course, you can do that at onewaterfront.org/feedback. And so what we did this past year is take all of this feedback and start to analyze where we were from the project to refine the design down to a more finalized schematic design. And so what you're seeing here is the current schematic design for Pierce Park Phase 3. For those of you who might have joined this session a year ago, we had a design on the screen that was much larger and had a number of open green spaces on it. But for a variety of factors, we spent some time refining this design to make sure that it was meeting both the goals of the project, but also the needs of the community as well. And so as we started to work on this updated design, a few issues became apparent with the original design that we had put forth in the spring of last year. First and foremost, the footprint of that project was going to be much larger and have a much greater environmental impact on the site itself. And that was due to the type of marine engineering that was being utilized to create the landscape within the footprint of the pier. And so we went back to the drawing board and made some changes to that design and looked to really minimize that environmental impact while also making sure that we could design a project that could be built within the budget that we were looking to build it for, but also still provided the community access to the water, the natural landscapes, and gathering places within the park that was so important that we heard feedback from the community all along. The way we went about doing that is to actually leverage some of the existing conditions that are on the site itself. For example, you see in the middle there that half circle is outlining an existing spit of land that was built as part of the original pier over 100 years ago, and it's been in place for some time. There's an existing concrete apron that we think would be a great access point out to the water, but also allows us to do some specialized marine engineering to create more of a landform in place here without having to do things that are harmful to the environment, like extensive dredging and filling of the harbor. And as well, the existing concrete apron and substructure does give us the opportunity to do some additional work in terms of creating natural habitat around the pier that isn't necessarily intended for human access, but more for a point of observation. And so this is where you can kind of see these two theories coming into practice here. The leveraging of the existing landscape to create the overall area of the park with a fishing and picnic pier. There is a coastal meadow and tide pools out towards the end, and of course the salt marsh towards the middle, which created the natural landscape and habitat that we had heard so much interest about throughout the outreach for the project itself. All of this comes together utilizing a sheet pile bulkhead wall that is put into the site itself along the inside of that pier. And that's one of the reasons why in this current design, it's important to have that pier as part of the design, because it actually allows for that wall to be concealed behind it and then create the ability to have a landscape that allows for the circulation of people moving in and around the park and right down to the edge of the water. And this existing pier structure, again, is reimagined as an enhanced habitat area. And that's one of the things that we're really quite proud of this current design, is that it still allows for all of the different types of educational and ecological activities that we had always imagined as part of this project. It still allows us to create those immersive ecological environments, allows kids and students to get down to the water to conduct research and testing, to understand the urban water environment. And then also the enhanced habitat area gives us the opportunity to create, utilizing some man-made structures, a more enhanced habitat area that allows for an increase in marine life in and around this particular site. That again can be observed from either the land area or even by a kayak sailing around it. A big milestone in this project was reached very recently when we filed our environmental notification form at the end of February. That's the first step in the permitting process for this project. The permitting, as you might imagine, is something that is anticipated to take a good deal of time, and we're excited to have that process underway. So we are in a period of public comment. So if anyone wants to make a public comment to MEPA, which is the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Agency, they're the ones that oversee these types of projects that are going on. We welcome you to leave a comment. And if you go to onewaterfront.org and to our recent events page, you can find a presentation that we gave recently about this, as well as a link to where you can submit a public comment to MEPA about the project itself. If everything goes smoothly with the permitting, we're still anticipating being on track to start construction sometime within the next year or so, probably early to mid 2024. And construction timeline itself will probably take approximately 18 months or so. Ideally, we'll be able to finish the construction for the park sometime in 2025. One of the questions that we've been wrestling with quite a bit and making sure that we're not only thinking about proactively, but creatively as well, is this idea of resilience. And the definition that you see here is the capacity to withstand or recover quickly from difficulties or toughness. We've always talked about this park needing to be resilient, but we've spent a lot of time in the last few months understanding or trying to understand what exactly it's going to take to build a resilient park. What types of interventions are we going to use, materials, everything from the elevations of the park to how the stone that is used to create the landscape meets the water. Because if you're not aware, or if you've heard us talk about before, we know that there is the risk of tidal flooding along Boston's shoreline, particularly if we see weather events like we had just yesterday with the spring nor'easter. We actually got pretty lucky yesterday because the astrological tide was not nearly as high as it could be, having to do with where the moon is in the overall tide cycle. And so there wasn't extensive flooding yesterday, but there is that potential for the type of flood that we've seen other places like in New York City. And so one of the things that we've really strived to do is understand what the future sea level projections would look like or at the park itself. And so we've started this process by initially just looking at what the mean tide benchmark it looks like today. And so essentially what this means is that the tide goes up and down in a range of almost 10 feet throughout the day. And so this is what that park design would look like at high tide if we built it today. But there's also an understanding amongst our design team and others that there are going to be tidal events or periods of time where that water comes up much higher. And as we progress into the future and we see the sort of continued increase in sea level rise, those events are going to become more extensive. And so we sort of have to prepare for that and what that looks like. So for example, this shows the likelihood of a 1 in 10 storm or a 1 in 100 storm in that same time period in 2023. And so this again shows where the water is going to interact much more heavily with the site. And so we have to be very thoughtful about the plants that we use and the types of materials that we use. And then as you imagine, as you start to project this out from 2030 and beyond, these flooding periods, and again, these are just temporary events where the tide may only come up for an hour or two at very high tide during a storm, but it has the possibility or even the probability of completely inundating this site. And so we have to be very mindful of not only what does that mean for the design as it is today, but what is it going to mean for the design in the future? And so we're trying to work really hard with our design team to anticipate what updating the design might look like in 20 years or 30 years or 50 years. Because eventually, once you get to 2070, there's a 1 in 100 chance that there will be a storm that completely subsumes this site for at least a short period of time. Again, this isn't something that we anticipate would be a permanent state, but we have to make sure that we're thoughtful about the materials that we're using and the design that we're building to withstand such an inundation. And that's certainly something that we have seen parks do successfully other places, and is a big piece of the work that we're doing now to understand and make sure that whatever we're building today has the opportunity to exist now and into the future. So as we move forward, we're going to finalize the design of the Pierce Park projects here in the coming months. We still do have a period of design development to go to work out a lot of the details about those materials that are being used and where they're being leveraged. The Pierce Park 3 project is under construction, as I mentioned at the top. Or excuse me, the Pierce Park 2 section, I should say, is under construction. But there is going to be an access point for us to utilize in between Pierce Park Lane and Phase 2 to build out our project once the Phase 2 project is completed here sometime within, hopefully by the end of the year is their current plan. And so that's our update for today. Look forward to any questions anyone might have, and really appreciate any of the feedback.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nick, Amy, and Vidya. We do have a couple of questions here, but again, if anybody who is watching would like to submit their questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, please do so. To start us off, when will the design be finished?
Well, that's a good question. We're still working on trying to hammer out a few details in the overall structure, the schematic design. And so once we get that wrapped up, hopefully here actually within the next couple of weeks, we'll be able to move to the design detail phase of work, which I don't anticipate taking much more than a couple months. Additionally, because we have done so much design work already as part of the schematic design phase. And so our goal remains to have the design wrapped up by the end of the year, and so we can be deep into the permitting process and answering questions and gathering feedback from the permitting agencies that will be working on that.
Wonderful, thank you. And this kind of dovetails into this next question, which is, when will construction begin?
Yeah, so I mentioned this a little bit looking at one of the timeline slides, but that's going to be heavily dependent upon when the permitting process is complete. Again, we've been having conversations with the permitting agencies for some time. We've received a lot of positive feedback and support about the overall project, but now we're sort of getting down to brass tacks and talking about some of the details and what we want to move where and what it would take to build these types of structures. And so presumably there will be some additional feedback that we'll need to respond to as part of that permitting process, which again, hopefully doesn't take much more than about a year or so. But once we finish the permitting process, we'll be able to finalize all the construction documentation and get started building straight away. So hopefully I would say by early 2024, we'd be able to begin construction.
Thank you. Another one here is, how much will it cost to build? How much have you raised?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. And that's one of the things that we're working on pretty much on a daily basis through a lot of work and support from a lot of the folks on this call. So first of all, thank you. If you have been one of the ones active in contributing to this project, we really appreciate it. So the current design itself is estimated to cost approximately $44.5 million to build. We're still, again, of course, refining that design to make sure that we're maximizing our efficiencies and building the project in the most cost-effective way possible. To date, we've raised over $32 million, so we're already 2/3 of the way there for the capital construction costs. But we do still have some work to do to close that remaining gap, and so we'll be working on that over the course of the next year as well. To make sure that we come up with a final design that is in line with our expected fundraising efforts, because that's again one of our early objectives is to be able to build this using philanthropic support, which, as you might imagine, is not an easy proposition. And so we've made a lot of progress though.
Thank you. Another question, if you're able, is are there any plans for a park perhaps in the Seaport or Fort Point area?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So we started this process. Gosh, I've been with the organization since 2017 with a site investigation and identifying a number of places where we thought would be real great places for open space. There is an area along Fort Point Channel that we looked at quite a bit that is part of what was known as the 100 Acres Plan, which is a planning process that the community went through that set aside, I want to say 11 or 12 acres to be built out as open space. That is well underway. There's a number of developments going in that area that as part of the development process, they've been required to build out some of that open space, or actually a good bit of it. And so I think we'll probably start to see a lot of that come online as those developments are built out in the next probably 2 to 3 years or so. But it is something that the Fort Point community was pretty active in determining how those places would be built and who would be managing them. And so the City of Boston Parks and Recreation Department will be managing those spaces once they're built. And the operations and maintenance is going to be paid for by the developers who are going to be building them. We also looked at, speaking of the Seaport, another parcel down on the far end known as Dry Dock number 4, which is one that was of great interest to us, particularly early in this process. And so we are have always continued to have conversations with the city. It's owned by the city. Lately, the city has actually been utilizing the dry dock. When we began this conversation with them, they hadn't been using it, but they're doing a number of bridge reconstruction projects. There's one in the north end as well. They're looking at Northern Avenue Bridge needing to be torn down and rebuilt. And then, of course, there's the Long Island Bridge. And I guess good for the city, but unfortunately for us, they have found a way to utilize Dry Dock 4 as lay down space for construction for those particular activities. And so that is unfortunately kind of delayed any of our efforts to turn it into a park, at least for the foreseeable future.
If I can jump in there and just add that there are a number of different sites, like Nick mentioned, and some more additional ones that Nick and the team have been exploring very closely with the City of Boston and other state agencies. So I think it's an exciting opportunity, given the flood mitigation that needs to happen in a collaborative way. We have a number of nonprofits engaged, and so site selection, will depend on a number of parties agreeing to come together, but work our way through all these different opportunities.
Wonderful. Thank you both. We have time just for a couple more here. Did you explore the opportunity to raise the overall elevation of the park so a larger section of the park would be accessible and open for use during the expected SLR in 2050 to 2070? Also, are living shorelines being deployed as part of the design?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. One of the original concepts as part of that design that we had talked about last year, which again was built out quite wide into the underlying landscape. It did have a good bit of elevation attached to it as well. But to accomplish that, we had to, again, build a very wide base that required a bunch of dredging and then a whole bunch of fill to achieve that elevation. I will say again, those maps that we've shown are flooding events. Again, if you think back to yesterday, to be honest, it wouldn't have been a very good park day yesterday to be down at this particular location. And so it's less important, I think, for us to make sure that we're maintaining access during those flooding events rather than enabling ourselves to quickly recover from them. Today's quite beautiful. It's very sunny out here today. And so despite, maybe a bit of a chilly wind, having a park that can easily bounce back and recover from a flooding event is far more, I would say, important than making sure that the elevation is so high that it never sees water. And your second point about the living shorelines, that's an excellent question, and one that we've looked at quite a bit. And I think that that salt marsh there in the middle is our attempt to really explore that as a viable option, because one of the things that we're really looking to do with this project is establish a baseline of design standards for the city of Boston, because this project is really focused on one little small place, but this is these are problems that are faced in all corners of the city, along the 47 miles of shoreline that we have here in the city of Boston. And so it's important for us to not only do something really unique and special here, but also something that can be used as a model and interpreted and applied in other places. And so the salt marsh in that particular area is a good example of how that living shoreline might come about. There are other options for living shorelines that integrate more rocky edges that have coastal plantings behind them to create the elevation. And so it's a combination of techniques that we're applying here, and that we really hope can be successful, because these are all factors that we have to take into consideration, not only from a construction perspective, but from an operations and maintenance perspective as well.
Wonderful again. And another one here is, have there been any funds provided from either the city, the state, or any organizations to assist in this project?
Yeah, so there has been a modest but meaningful contribution of public funding, first from the federal level. We received a congressionally directed spending grant from our congressional delegation of $2 million. That was designated in 2022. We also received a $2 million grant from the state as part of their ARPA funding towards the end of 2022 as well. And we do have designs to apply for CPA, Community Preservation Act funding from the city for this park. But that'll happen later in the process once we work out some of the legal details with Massport, the landowner.
Okay, and we have one more question for you, Nick. Thank you. Who is responsible for Pierce Park 2, and how will it be used by the public?
Yeah, so Pierce Park 2 is being designed and operated by Massport. They're the ones that built the original Pierce Park. And if any of you have been over there, whoop, I clicked my button. There we go. Sorry about that. If any of you have been over to the original Pierce Park, you'll note that it's a rather well-maintained park. And I think that's one of the things that Massport really takes pride in, is their ability to maintain these public green open spaces. When Pierce Park was built and designed back in the 90s, it was intended as a passive park. And so the second section of the park, Pierce Park 2, was designed to be active. And so that's one of the reasons why you see that big open oval of green space. It's basically like a big open lawn where anything from a pickup soccer game to a wiffle ball game, or a bunch of picnics could happen in this open space. And so one of our intentions working with Massport and their design team was to create a network of parks that all felt like one park, but had unique experiences within them. And so we've really focused on an immersive experience for phase 3 to go with the active section of phase 2 and the passive section of phase 1. And not duplicate or replicate some of the other experiences like big open lawns like they have in phase 2, or play structures or things like that, and really focus on what we could uniquely provide in phase 3. And so that's kind of how we've operated, and we will coordinate the operations and maintenance together with them. A lot of the programming that I showed you at the beginning of this presentation all took place in the original Pierce Park. And I think that's something that we'll look to do, is to bring additional programming to the entirety of the complex, because there are certain activities that will be much better suited for the open green lawns on phase 2 versus the in-water educational work, which of course you would want to do down in phase 3. And so that's one of the unique skill sets that I think the trustees really brings to this relationship, is not only the ability to maintain the place to a high degree of satisfaction, but also program it in a way that feels welcoming and engaging for all audiences.
Okay, thank you so much to all of you again. Nick, if you could close the webinar, thank you so much.
Happy to. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. All of our webinar recordings in this series, and to register for future webinars, you can just visit thetrustees.org/webinars. And again, everything that you heard about today would not be possible without our donors, especially top supporters like our Founders Circle members. If you're not yet Founders Circle and would like to find out more, please visit our website or give us a call. So thank you again today for joining us and for investing in our mission and for believing in the brighter future of the Trustees organization. So on behalf of Vidya and Amy and the events team, thanks again, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.